Yossi v'tzadik a bracha of fish, because fish have no ayin hara, because they're always covered. So the Rabbi used to say that. I know Zara the Yosef. In this respect, we're chassidim of Yosef, of the Friyadike Rebbe, that there's no ayin hara. So they wish to help us. And alle brachas and a happy birthday, and alle simchas, and so on. Amen. Amen. And all the brachas should be recycled. There should be teiv, hanira, vanigla, in all the aspects. This is my vacation. Vacation now. And you see how far I went. If I sleep 15 more minutes, it's a big vacation. But for Mr. Shpilman, there's no vacation. Okay, Mr. Shpilman doesn't have vacation for anybody else, so I can't have vacation for her. So the girls called me. They collaborated. So here I am, and I figure that it's Chayde Shalom. At least we'll begin to talk about Teshuva. Talk about Teshuva. Okay, very good. They're not going to hold it against me or blackmail. I think it's an appropriate topic to talk about Teshuva. It's the season. It's the time. There's so many points we talk about. The standard speeches are Melech Basade, Chodesh HaCheshbon, which are also good topics. But let's talk about Teshuva. Teshuva is a very important topic. It's a very interesting topic. And it's a topic that we don't pay enough attention to. We don't pay enough attention to for many reasons, or on many levels. And I suppose the level where we don't pay enough attention to Teshuva more than anything else is how special it is. What a gift from God it is. What a special matana it is. At the Eibush gave us an opportunity to do Teshuva. So I looked a bit, important events of Teshuva in Tanakh and in Chazal. Stories, individuals, people who represented, who brought out this koyach, this bracha, this matana of Teshuva. So first of all, there's the Midrashim. Adam Rishon did the first Aveda, right? Man wasn't alive for 3 hours, and the Yetzer Hara was evidently well crafted, right? It wasn't made in China. There was no problems with recalls and toxic materials. The Eibishter made the Yetzer Hara himself. And somehow, within a couple of hours, Adam and Chava were too tempted by the Yetzer Hara. And of course, the Eibishter's trick basically is, he doesn't have one size fits all. It's custom made. Everybody has their own Yetzer Hara. And each person's Yetzer Hara is fit for that person. Just like the Yetzer Hara was fit. The Nachash HaKadmoni, the original serpent, was fit for Adam and Chava. And they didn't have Aveda. And Adam's reaction was very inappropriate. You learn Chumash, right? Adam's reaction was not desirable at all. Rashi immediately jumps on Adam's words, and he says, Adam doesn't have Aveda, right? And the teacher caught him, the Eibush caught him. What's his reaction? She did it. It's her fault. She did it. What do you want from me? Right? So he turns to Chava and says to her, what about you? His fault. The Nachash's fault. So of course Rashi says, what should be the next logical step? That the Rebbe should turn to the Nachash and say, you're responsible for all this? And the Nachash will say, yes. He says, why'd you do it? I mean, what do you mean what I did it? I tempted them. Who asked them to listen to me? Divrei Arav, Divrei Talmud, Divrei Mishaim. The Rav has spoken, the Talmud has spoken, the Eibishter spoke, the Nachash spoke. Who are you supposed to listen to? It's my fault that they listen to me? It's my job to tempt them. And they were tempted. What do you want from me? What's the good news? That the Eibishter didn't turn to the Nachash and say, is it your fault? Because the Rashi says, Nachash would immediately say, well, yes, I did it, but it's not my fault, it's their fault. Because ein mashivin al amasis, Rashi says. Amasis means somebody who makes others sin doesn't get a day in court. This is Jewish law. You do an Aveda, it doesn't matter what the Aveda is, you have a day in court. And you can do Teshuva. But machti es harabim, someone who makes other people sin, api halacha, according to Jewish law, doesn't get a day in court. The Nachash's liability was that he made other people sin, so the Eibush cut his legs off. As they state in Chumash. But Adam's reaction to Chet Eitz Hadas was to blame it on somebody else. And as a consequence, I mean, we know history, yes? He He brought Misa into the world for himself and for us, for all generations. And it's been interesting. It's been an interesting ride since Gan Eden. He had a son named Cain. Cain murdered Hevel. But Cain did Teshuva. It says that Cain was chotar. He made a groove, tachas kisya covered. He dug under the kisya covered, and he was. It says in some Chazal that he was peseach shal dev Teshuva. Right? We say in the Siddur and Rosh Hashanah Kippur, ha peseach shal. He opens up a gate for those who knock and ask to do tshuva. So in some places it's brought that this was Cain. Cain killed Hevel, and the Eibusha tells him, what did you do? Your brother's blood is crying to me from the earth. So Cain's response was, Godel avoini minisoi. You can't tolerate my sin. It doesn't say it's his fault. It doesn't say he had two twin sisters, they had only one sister. It doesn't say, I brought a carbon that you did not accept. My brother brought a carbon that you did accept. He didn't come up with stories and excuses like other Marishan. He says to Rebbe, you can't forgive me. Right? And of course, you know what it says in Chumash. Noisei avay vafesha, right? The word noisei, which is one of the words that's used to indicate tshuva, Cain uses that very, very word. So the Eibishter says, this is the son is not like the father. The father is always correct and it's his fault or her fault, somebody else's fault. The son says, you can't forgive me. So the Eibishter forgives him. Yes, Cain had to go into Golos, and Cain was eventually killed by one of his own descendants. But the Eibishter forgave Cain. Cain was the first one to do tshuva. And according to Torah, especially as it's explained in Chassidus, not only was the Cain the first one to do tshuva, he invented it. He created tshuva. Of course, man doesn't create anything, right? A person invented the telescope. He revealed the koyach, the Eibush, to put into the world to use glass in this particular way to amplify things and so forth. But and the same is true in Torah. When someone is machadash achidish, someone comes with an original idea, a new idea in Torah, you don't create anything. It's all in the Eibush, this Torah. Nevertheless, if you brought it out, if you brought it into the world, it's yours. It says in many Sfarim, says many Chazal, that the creator, the inventor of tshuva was Cain. He did tshuva. Which is very interesting, of course. The Eibishter forgave him. The Eibishter forgave Cain. He forgave him. It's not the highest level of tshuva, it's not the highest level of forgiveness, perhaps, but Cain opened up a pesach l'tshuva. So the Chazal say that Adam Rishon meets Cain. It's a medrash. Adam Rishon meets Cain, and he says to him, what did you do? Adam Rishon didn't kill anybody. He ate a fruit, sachakol. I mean, he brought... That was quite a costly fruit. It must have tasted delicious, but the effect of that fruit we're feeling till this day. And he was kicked out of Gan Eden for 130 years. He didn't live with Chava. His life was ruined. He says, what do you do? So I did tshuva. So the Medrash says that others bops him on the head. Oi, why didn't I think of that? Adam Rishon says to Cain, the Eibishter forgave you? He says, yeah. And Adam was jealous of his son, that he had done tshuva, and the Eibush had forgiven him for his tshuva. This is a story of tshuva. A very important story of tshuva. And you should know also that when the Eibush created Avraham Avinu as the father of the Jewish people, the Midrashim say, Avraham Avinu says to the Eibush, what happens if I'm not perfect? What happens if I do something inexact? What happens if I'm not 100% kosher as I'm supposed to be? The Eibush says, you'll fix it. You'll fix it. This is the koyach for tshuva. Of course, the second story of tshuva, the second story of tshuva that's significant, that's brought in the Torah, is which? I have quarters, I don't have a few. Who knows? What's the second story of tshuva brought in the Chumash? You should know this one. It's in Breishis, still in elementary school, before we were chewing gum and throwing spitball.
Yossi's brothers?
Reuven, not for the sin of selling Yosef. But for the Bilbo Yitzoyav, Reuven did tshuva. Rashi says, Besake with Anise, Reuven did tshuva. And Reuven's tshuva was tshuva. Reuven was a very great person. The people who come to Beis Medrash Lanoshim, sooner or later are going to hear me make this comment that when you learn the Tanakh, there are two personalities that clearly get a very difficult judgment. Two people, you read the Tanakh, there are two people the Eibush is very hard on. Reuven, the first of Yaakov Avinu's children, and Shaul HaMelech, the first king of Israel. The Eibishter was so unforgiving. And of course it's explained in Sfarim because they had extraordinarily great neshamas. The neshama of Reuven and the neshama of Shaul HaMelech. In Kabbalah, Shaul is on a much higher madrega than David. And there's reasons, of course there's deeper reasons. The bottom line is Reuven did tshuva and the Eibishter forgave him. And it says that Reuven is always put next to Yehuda. Why is Reuven put next to Yehuda? Because Shneyem tzadku al ovin shavayadam. Haidu. Reuven and Yehuda had something very basic in common. Reuven did Navera, and he acknowledged that he sinned. He didn't say it's his fault, it's the other one person's fault, it's not fair, it doesn't make sense, it's politics, it's ego, it's favoritism. And Yehuda said, she's right, I'm wrong, by the story of Tomer. So this is why they're put together, because they're both tzaddikim. And what makes them tzaddikim is that they did tshuva. It's the second very significant event of tshuva we have in the Torah. What's the next? What's next? Who can think of another? I'm trying to find one that I didn't think of. What's the next very serious event of tshuva that you have in Torah? Anybody? Think. I'm also thinking because I want to make sure I don't miss any.
Ninveh.
Who?
Ninveh.
Ninveh. Okay, but Ninveh is
not next.
It's not on my list as it happens. But David HaMelech. David HaMelech did tshuva, right? It's not an Ar Nusach. It's not an Ar Nusach. We don't say it, except in Slichas we say it. But in most Kehillas Kadishas B'Yisrael, most communities, many communities, when they say Vidui and Tachanun, they say a pasuk. Vayayim David el God. David HaMelech says to God HaNavi, God was the Navi, and God was the Navi who came to tell David, you didn't have it. So David HaMelech says, Tzali miyoid, I feel terrible. I feel terrible. I didn't have it, I feel terrible. What is God? Nasim was a little bit later. He says, God HaNavi. He says, Tzali, I feel terrible. And what does he say after that? Nipla no b'yad ad Hashem u'b'yad adam ala peila. Let Hashem punish me. U'b'yad adam ala peila. I shouldn't be punished by a person. This is what David HaMelech did tshuva. And there's an interesting pasuk in Tanakh with a medrash, which is rather compelling, that says, I think it's a medrash, it certainly says in Chassidus, I think it's a medrash, that the pasuk says, Eila David ha'achreinim, Ne'um David ben Yishai, U'ne'um Hagever Hukam Ol. It's a pasuk in Divrei Yamim. Nu'um, so speaks David, the son of Yishai. Right? David, son of Yishai, we know him. U'nu'um hagever, so speaks Gever, the person Hukam Ol. Hukam Ol, it's a pasuk. Hukam, who has stood up, who has made stand, Ol. What does Ol mean? What does the word Ol mean? Ayin Lamed. Ol. Ol means a yoke, that's correct. It's usually pronounced oil, in place of Ol with the comments, right? So there's different Medrash Chazal. Some Medrashim say, Nu'um HaGever Hukam Ol, that David HaMelech was Hakim Oila Shel Torah. David HaMelech lifted up the yoke of Torah. And Chassidus explains, what does it mean, he lifted up the yoke of Torah? David HaMelech celebrated halacha, practical dinim, more than anybody else. And that's where Kabbalah Sel Machas Shemayim comes in. A person studies Torah and enjoys it. That's pleasure. When you're learning Torah, but the Hilchah said to Paskin, David was a Rav. David Paskin Child, as the Gemara says, that's Nu'um HaGever Hukam Ol. But there's another medrash. Nu'um HaGever Hukam Ol she'heikim oila shel tshuva. The David HaMelech lifted up. He created the plow, the force with which Yidden do tshuva. So it says in Sfarim. I think it's a medrash, but if it's not a medrash, it certainly says in Sfarim. That David HaMelech lo yisei ma'aseh. David HaMelech is a Gemara. It's a Gemara Masechta Shabbos. I think David HaMelech was not at all on a level where he should have fallen to such an inyan. The Eibishter brought it on him, said that he should open up the passageway for all of us to be able to do tshuva. I'm almost certain it's a Gemara, 99% sure. I cannot cook that. It says, but I think it's a Gemara. The David HaMelech, the Eibishter brought David HaMelech an Aveda. That the Gemara says also it wasn't really an Aveda. David chata any elatayah. The Fiyarach the Madreg of David HaMelech, it was not appropriate. The Eibishter brought this Aveda onto David HaMelech, so that David HaMelech should be Poseach, Shal, Adovke B'tshuva. The Eibishter gave us precedence, in other words. Before we were born, the Eibishter created Avedas, using people, and inspired them to do tshuva. I guess the most critical individuals is Cain and David HaMelech. You have Reuven Taki in the middle, but the Ikid is Cain and David HaMelech, and there are others. And they set the stage. They created the possibility that Yidden in later generations should be able to do tshuva with this koyach. This is a couple of stories. Yeah. Who's next? Who's next? You mentioned Nineveh. I didn't put it on my list, but Nineveh is a great example. Nineveh, we mentioned Yom Kippur, right? Why do we mention Nineveh Yom Kippur? Because we're telling the Eibishter, you got to give people a chance, right? Meya Esrim, Meya Ribui, whatever the Lashon is, Meya Esrim Ribui, 120,000 people lived in Nineveh. Shnei Mesre Ribui, Ubehema Rabba, who knows how many animals. And the Eibishter doesn't just wipe people out. Yoine ben Amitai says to the Eibishter, wipe them off the face of the earth. Because Yoine was the Navi of Yidden. And he was afraid that the Eibishter saves Nineveh. It's going to make... You read the story of Yoine, right? You learned it in school, right? With Mora Naiman. So long as it's not, right? Not Mora Naiman? No? Somebody else? Okay. Yeah. Mora Naiman. That Yoine ben Amitai was afraid that if Hashem forgives the Goyim because they did tshuva, it's going to reflect very negatively on Klal Yisrael because Yidden did not do tshuva. Happy birthday. It's the same neshama. I don't know how it happens that you're born on different days. There's a Kabbalistic confusion here. We'll get the mystics soon. They're going to arrive with the Gematis and explain that it's the same birthday. It just doesn't... Things are not always the way they seem. In any case, so Yoineb didn't want the people of Nineveh to do tshuva, and he certainly didn't want the Eibishter to forgive him. So the Eibishter gives him the mashal. Hashem demonstrates to Yoineb ben Amitai with the kikoyin, right? With the kikoyin, with that tree, that very shady tree that dies overnight, and Yoineb's Marli Admovas. Yoineb says, "I'm dying from heat. I can't take it. Take my life away from me." And the Eibishter says, "You're depressed. You're disappointed. You're frustrated by a tree that bin laila hoyo, bin laila over. Yesterday it grew, now it's gone. You didn't work on it." He says, "This is meine kindalach." So on Yom Kippur, we mention Nineveh that the Eibishter should kvayachol remember that even Rishayim, a person does tshuva. There's no such thing as the Eibishter not being peseach shal, devki b'tshuva, not to give a yid an opportunity to do tshuva. But there's a detail about the story of Nineveh which is important. There's a very important detail about the story of Nineveh, and that is that the pasuk says, "Vayara lekim es ma'aseim." You're familiar with the story of Nineveh? The king of Nineveh gets off his chair, off his throne. He takes off adarta, he takes off his red royal robes. It says in Chazal this was Parei Melech Mitzrayim. If it was Parei Melech Mitzrayim, you got to figure it was 650, 700 years old. So I don't know exactly how to say it, but Pashtus it was a Gilgal. I don't think it necessarily means that it was physically the same person. But it was a goy, a Rosha, who had a connection to the nefesh, in whatever way, the neshama of Parei Melech Mitzrayim, and he knew instinctively that it ain't good to start up with God, that's number one, and that you could negotiate with the Eibishter. So he called people for tshuva. The Tanakh said, I always think about this, men, women, children, and animals fasted for 72 hours straight. They didn't feed their chickens. You understand? As they state in Tanakh, there's no such thing up here. You make animals fast and children fast. But everybody fasted. And he said, we got to do tshuva. And the pasuk says the tshuva was not sakam v'tanisam. The Eibishter didn't say, I like the people living there because they cried and they feel bad. The tshuva was a person stole, he took the genev and he went and he returned it. If a person damaged somebody's property, he came and he paid for it or he repaired it. It says in Chazal that they did tshuva beyond the halach. A person built his house with stolen beams. So he took his house apart, he took out the beams and returned them to the Labia. Api din, api halacha, in Jewish law, there's something called takonas hashavim. Takanat hashavim in Hebrew. Takonas hashavim is English. So in Hebrew, it's takanat hashavim. Takonas hashavim means that when a person is doing tshuva, you have to help him. And one of the halachas, takonas hashavim, is if somebody has stolen something from you and they're doing tshuva, and they want to return it, you're not supposed to take it. Yes, that's a din.
You'll pay for it.
Huh?
You'll pay for it.
No, oichet nicht. The Gemara says, the halacha says, forgive him because you'll make it. Yeah, this steht in Teda. Should help him do tshuva. Then there is a halacha where if he insists, so then he has to return the item. But does he have to return the original item, or is it sufficient if he returns the monetary value, if he insists on returning it? And the halacha would be, if you took a beam and built it into a house, you don't have to take your house apart, you can pay for it. The first din is that you should tell him you're forgiven. Do tshuva, you don't have to pay my debt. If he insists on paying for it, or if you're not such a big tzaddik and you want to collect the debt, I mean, you're allowed to take it from him. But the Chazal say it's not such. Ideally, the best way is if a person is doing tshuva, and they come at you and saying, I want to do tshuva, I owe you money, you should say, don't give it to me, to ease the tshuva process. But to take apart your heart and take out beams and return them, for sure, no necessity al pi halacha. So the pasuk says, Vayara lekim es ma'aseim. When the people of Nineveh did tshuva, it doesn't say the Eibishter saw sakam v'tanisam. They're sackcloths and they're ash and they're crying. It's very good, right? In America, everybody's very, very sincere, but that's about where it ends. It's ma'aseim. It's what they did, what they delivered. They actually went ahead and came to whoever, and they were willing to correct their ways. And this was an act of tshuva that we learned, Takel Lahavdul, from Einam Yehudim, we learned from Goyim. But there are many other significant events of tshuva in Jewish history and in Chazal. Can you think of another?
Purim.
Huh? Purim, yeah. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. It's also not on my list. I guess I missed the obvious ones. Menashe Melech Yisrael. Menashe ben Chizkiah. You know who Menashe was? You've heard of Menashe Melech Yisrael? His father was a big tzaddik. Chizkiah Melech. And this is a story that everybody has to know. I mean, you don't have to know it, but some people have to know it. Chizkiah Melech Yehuda saw that if he got married, he would have children Rishayim. Kinder, nicht kein gute Kinder. Not good kids. So he didn't get married. He remained a bachelor. And he got sick. And he was going to die. And the Navi Yeshaya came to him and said to him, you should know that the reason for your premature dying is because you don't get married. And he told the Navi, but I'm not going to have good children. So the Navi told him, Bahadi kofshe de Rachman Allah Malach. The Rabbi says this b'chabrengen all the time. Bahadi kofshe de Rachman Allah Malach means the secrets of God are not your business. Most people don't have that information, right? Nobody knows how the kids are going to, they don't come with tags. And you certainly don't get to visit them in Gan Eden and check them out ahead of time, right? But Chizkiyahu HaMelech knew, so it's not your business. It's the secrets of the Eibishter. You have to do what the Eibishter writes in his data. So Chizkiyahu got married. But before that, of course, it says in the Pasuk, V'yasif Chizkiyahu ponav al akir v'yisparo. Chizkiyahu turned around and he faced the wall and he davened. And Yeshaya Navi told him, it's finished. You're wasting your time. Your life is over. You don't get a second chance. And Chizkiyahu wasn't the Navi. He was only the Melech. Chizkiyahu said the Eibishter never, ever takes away a person's opportunity to correct. And he davened, and he got 15 more years. As in Tanakh. And he had two sons, Yakim and Menashe. One was a bigger chutzpahnik than the other. They were rotten from the moment they were born. Who did he marry, first of all? A minute, who did he marry? He married Yeshaya Navi's daughter. He figures he'll marry a tzaddikis. He's a tzaddik, and she's a, how terrible could they be? Well, guess what? They were exactly like their parents, backwards. You know. and one of the issues with Menashe was he forgot to die. He was a king for 55 years. Nobody came close. Menashe was a king for 55 years, for more than half a century. The kings with the greatest longevity were 40 years. David HaMelech was 40 years, Shlomo Melech was. For 55 years. The first 22 years, he was a big, big Rasha. And the last 33 years, he was a Baal Tshuva. But he was a Rasha. I mean, the Mishnah says, he was a terrible man. And he used to make fun of Torah. Menashe used to mock the Torah. He used to make fun of the Midrashim. And say, this is divine, this is fairy tales. Menashe Melech Yisrael, the son of Chizkiyahu Melech. And the Eibishter forgave him too. But Menashe said, do I have hope? And the answer that came was, even you, Tshuva, there are no barriers between anybody and Tshuva. Menashe Melech Yisrael was about Tshuva. He did Tshuva. In the middle, he was arrested and taken away, and then he came back. But he did Tshuva. Menashe Melech Yisrael did Tshuva. And then, of course, you mentioned the story of Purim. I mean, there's no shortage of examples of people who did Tshuva. But let me share with you this. Yeah, let me share with you this. Two personalities, two people lived in times of the Shas, times of the Gemara. One was a tzaddik who became a Rasha, and the other was a Rasha who became a tzaddik. The tzaddikim who became Rishayim, we have two examples. The first is, Who's the first one? That tzaddik became a Rasha. Rabbi Yochanan Ken Gadol. The Gemara says, Shimish Pei Shana V'Nasat Tzduchi. Yochanan Ken Gadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim 80 years. And the Gemara says, in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, there were 280 Kohanim Gedolim. That's it in the Gemara. 280. The whole standing of the second Beis HaMikdash is 420 years. Now, what's the average survival rate? About a year and 8 months. Do the math. And then the Gemara says, Shimon HaTzadik was a Kohen Gadol for 40. Yochanan Ken Gadol was a Kohen Gadol for 80. So you got to take off from the 420, 120. So you're left with 300. Then the Gemara brings up another one who was the Kohen Gadol for 11 years. Every Kohen Gadol did it once and died. Because they used to pay for the honor. They were wealthy. And they knew they were not going to survive the year. They knew they were going to die. And it was worthwhile for them to pay with their lives to have one opportunity to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. Why? Because to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you have to be holy. Yochanan Ken Gadol went in 80 times. Pretty holy man. And then he fell. He became a tzeduki, an apokedus. Now, how could such a thing happen? How could such a thing happen? So there's an alta chassidish vart, which I suppose you've heard, but if you haven't heard, this is a good one to remember. Tell it to your kids, and then your kids will tell it to you. Yeah, Yochanan Ken Gadol shimish meinim shana. Yochanan Gadol was a Ken Gadol for 80 years. V'nasa tzeduki. He discovered that he's a tzaddik. And as gevarim bazich gerecht, he became self-righteous. And when a person becomes aware that they're a tzaddik, that's the beginning of the end. It's called in Kuntus Umayan, machazik toiva liyatzmi. When a person is machazik toiva, he sees greatness in himself. Someone decided that it was boring. You can try again. I don't know what to do. Okay.
You should have learned Tanya.
And then he would have stayed on the line. Okay. Machazik toiva liyatzmi. The moment a person notices their own maile, there's a complacency that sets in, and it cascades. It snowballs, it tumbles down the mountain, and so forth and so on. The other personality who was a tzaddik became a rasha was, your mother knows, she just doesn't want to embarrass me. Who's the second one? Elisha Acher, Elisha ben Avuya. We've mentioned the Pirkei Avos, right? Elisha ben Avuya was a Tana. The Gemara in Masechta Chagiga tells a whole variety of different stories. Thank you. The Gemara tells a whole bunch of, and you can eat food, don't worry, it's okay. It's not class. The Gemara tells a whole bunch of reasons what happened to Elisha. In his childhood, he used to listen to music from Avodah Zarah, and he would smell, his mother used to smell when she was pregnant with him. The reach of Avodah Zarah, the psamim from Avodah Zarah. And then, of course, there was the event of Abba Shenichnas Ulapardis. They started to learn secrets of the Torah, Kabbalah. You know the story, right? It's famous. So one of the 4 people died. One of the 4 people, Nebuch lost his mind. And Elisha ben Avuya, the Gemara says, he looked, v'kititz ben atiyas, and he started to make separations, to cut down the trees, make separations. Rachmana litzlan, a separation between higher and lower. This is the beginning of Avodah Zarah, the opposite of Achdus. So Elisha Acher was a Taneh, one of the greatest we ever had. And he fell. And the Chachamim stayed away from him. Except for Rabbi. Rabbi was his Talmud, and Rabbi used to follow him. And the Chachamim said, how could you learn from a person like this? And Rabbi says, I'm able to discern, to separate. Rabbi says, I'm able to separate the fruit from the peel. And Rabbi continued learning from Elisha Acher. And the Chazal say that there was a voice that came out from heaven and said, Shuvu vonim shevavim. A voice came out of the heaven and says, return, bonim, children who have gone astray. So Rabbi Meir said to his Rebbe, Chazerbach, do tshuva. So Elisha said, but the voice said, Shuvu vonim shevavim, chutz me'acher. That's the voice, the heavenly voice that he heard said, except for Acher. So Rabbi Meir said, Dochach hashav nichnas. The Gemtachet, they told you that they're not going to help you do tshuva. But if you insist on doing tshuva, there's no such thing as a person who cannot do tshuva. Unfortunately, he did not do tshuva during his lifetime. And of course, the end of the story was that when he died, they wouldn't let him into Gehenna. And Rabbi Meir said that when he passes away, he's going to negotiate, they should let him into Gehenna. So when Rabbi Meir passed away, smoke started to come out of Elisha's grave. And Rabbi Yochanan was an Amoy, lived several centuries later, several hundred years later, said, I'm going to get him out of Gehenna. So the smoke stopped coming. When Rabbi Yochanan passed away, the smoke stopped coming from Elisha Acher's grave. But we know a person spends no more than 11 months in Gehenna. He spent a couple hundred times 11 months in Gehenna, Elisha. But then there is, of course, the personality who was the Rosh who did Teshuva. And this was Rabbi Elazar ben Dedaya, right? Elazar ben Dedaya, you heard of Elazar ben Dedaya? You know? He's mentioned in the Gemara. He wasn't a Tana, he was a Rosh. He spent his whole life doing Avedas. He had a big neshama, but when he did Teshuva, he died immediately. He didn't get a chance to be Mechadash and Chedushim and Torah. The Gemara says, he did not miss an opportunity to do an Aveda. He wouldn't miss a chance. He was obviously a big person with a major Yetzer Hara. You know, the Eibishter created, just like he custom made a Yetzer Hara for other Medicine, he custom made a Yetzer Hara for Elisha Acher, for Elazar ben Dedaya. And he also heard a voice that came from heaven that said, return, do Teshuva. And he decided to do Teshuva. So the Gemara tells a very interesting story, which is a meaningful story. It's a story you have to think about. The story goes that he asked different beings to help him do Teshuva. He asked the heaven to help him do Teshuva. He asked the earth to help him do Teshuva. He asked the land to help him do Teshuva. He asked the sea to help him do Teshuva. He asked everybody to help him do Teshuva. And everybody said that if they're going to do Teshuva, they have their own Avedas that they need to correct. Everyone had there's psukim for each one. The heaven has to fix this Aveda, the earth has to fix the other Aveda. And Elazar ben Dedaya made a discovery. Teshuva, by yourself. It's like a party, everybody shows up. Teshuva, lonely business. So when Elazar ben Dedaya realized that he has no support, everyone else is busy. When it comes to doing Teshuva, nobody wants to help you. So he did Teshuva himself. And the Gemara says he went between two mountains. Nasser Roshi ben Birkov. He put his head between his knees. Vego'o bibchi. And he died from crying. As they state in the Gemara. The Gemara says. And the Gemara concludes, Bacha Rabbi v'yomer, Rabbeinu HaKodeš, the great Tana, the one who wrote the Mishnayos, cried and he said, Yesh mi shekoyna elami b'shah achas. It's conceivable that a person should acquire Elam Haba in 1 hour. Yesh mi shekoyna elami b'shah achas. A person should acquire Elam Haba in 1 hour. And of course, there's different translations of why Rabbi cried. I'm sure you've heard this, right? The Morosh Chedernik say that Rabbi cried, it's not fair. I have to be from my whole life. He gets into heaven in 1 hour, right? That's one pshat. Let's take this one. Another pshat is, Rabbeinu HaKodeš was crying, what does it mean, the Eibishter gives a yid to do Teshuva? That, the last moment, that the din was that Kol HaMumsin Misvadin, when a person was killed in Bezdin, for an event, a person was Shabbos Achman al did another Aveda, and he was put to death. He was forced to say Vidui, to confess. If he didn't want, they forced him. Why? Because the confession that he did before he was actually executed constituted Teshuva, and when he died, he went straight to Gan Eden. The Misa was Machaper, because he was confessing before. Even if he said, I didn't do it, he would say, I didn't do it. It's a lie. It's a conspiracy. I was set up, and so on and so forth. Why should I admit to an Aveda which I did not commit? They forced him to do Vidui, and then they executed him, and he went straight to Gan Eden because it constituted him from Kapot Teshuva and therefore Kapora. So Elazar ben Dedaya, at the end of his life, did Teshuva. So there's two things you have to know about Elazar ben Dedaya. The first thing says in Kisvei Arizal, when Elazar ben Dedaya came to Gan Eden, he came Lamaila, so he was a tzaddik gomer. A person should do Teshuva till the neshama leaves the guf is a very high madrega of tzaddik. So naturally, Elazar ben Dedaya deserves what kind of Gan Eden? But he had no mitzvahs. He didn't do any mitzvahs. He had no levushim, as it's called, no garments. So it says in Kisvei Arizal that they took the mitzvahs of Yechanan Kohen Gadol, and they gave him. As they say in Kisvei Arizal, Yechanan Kohen Gadol was a tzaddik his whole life. He was a Kohen Gadol. At the last moment, he did Avedis. He became an Apikadis. Elazar ben Dedaya was a Rosh his whole life. At the last moment, he did Teshuva. So they took the mitzvahs of Yechanan Kohen Gadol and they gave him to Rebbe Elazar ben Dedaya. That's the first point. The second point I want to mention to you is that the Rebbe says in the Sichas, a person should do Teshuva and die. It doesn't sound like Yiddishkeit. A person should do Teshuva and live. So the Rebbe said, Elazar ben Dedaya was the first one who ever did Teshuva on such a level. The level of Teshuva he did had never been done before. Not by Cain, and not even by David HaMelech. It was a higher madrega of Teshuva. And he died doing Teshuva. But after him, anybody else could do Teshuva like he did, and live like Yom HaShanim Tevis. That's what the Rebbe said. You can have a Arichas Yom HaShanim. Like the story of Yosef Balagola, with that fellow who did Teshuva until the Mamzedim died, and he lived. The highest madrega of Teshuva. So those are some examples from history of Yidden who did Teshuva. Now let's get a little closer. I want to tell you two more stories, if you don't mind. Okay, when you'll yawn, I'll know it's time to wind it down. Tell you two more stories. The first is a story with the Alter Rebbe, and the second is a story with the Rebbe. All about Teshuva. Interessante Meises here. The story is printed in Fala Khan's Meises. I heard the story from Rabbi Mangel. Rabbi Mangel knows how to tell stories. I read the story in the book. I said, really? Is that what he said? In the book, it was a lot more boring than the way he told the story. So I'll tell it to you in Rabbi Mangel's version. Upon him, he heard it from his mashpiyah. And the story goes like this: that the Alter Rebbe had a chassid, a malamed in a shtetl, who had a son who was a prodigy, a genius, an unusual child. He went through school teachers, like kids go through candy. He outgrew a teacher every day, and in a very, very short time he was teacherless. Because he was a genius, the Kapik Van Offen, and in a relatively speaking short period of time, he mastered the Torah. He knew it all. Before Bar Mitzvah, alles gekent. And he was plain, simple bored. Here was a chassid who traveled to the Alter Rebbe with a boy who had so many gifts. And l'chayra, he grew up in a Hasidic house, in a Hasidic shtetl, in a Hasidic malamdim. All his father had to do was bring him to Mount Rebbe. Why he didn't bring him to Mount Rebbe, I'll never know. But the kid became absolutely frustrated by lack of intellectual challenge. That he left home and he started to look for knowledge. And he got involved in mathematics. And he moved to Vienna. You're talking 200 years ago. It was a center of learning. And he became one of the greatest mathematicians. And he published several books of mathematics. And he, of course, in those days, much, much more than today, going to college was synonymous with being an applicatus. If you were an educated person, you automatically didn't believe in God. Stupid people believed in God. Today, Baruch Hashem, the smart people have gotten stupid also. So you have great professors. There's a famous story about Albert Einstein. I read it in an article that was published recently about a group of intellectuals who were sitting at a party, and one said to the other, they once made a statement, find me one intelligent, well-educated person who believes in God. So Einstein says, here's one. And they almost fell off their chairs. This is about 80 years ago. Things have changed. If you think religion is doing bad, you're misunderstanding. What we have in our culture is we're Baalei taiva. We allow ourselves every gift, every taiva. We're very permissive. And in this way, we're worse than they were in those days. But the world is closer to the Eibishter now than it's been in a long time. In the last several centuries, the world has become modern, and modernness was always linked with apikosis. Today, the world is recognizing, the limitations of science and limitations of human achievement. Everybody the Eibishter is more alive today than he was a century ago. That's a fact. But in any case, he went to Vienna 200 years ago, and he gave up everything. Not only he didn't keep Shabbos and kosher. There's no Eibishter, the whole religion is the Baba Meiser and so. Years passed. And he wrote a letter to his father that he's this big professor, he should come visit him. And the father says, I'm not going to Vienna, I'm going to Shvalorot, and they didn't lose anything. If you want, you can come visit me. The son, who was so disenfranchised, he was so far away, he felt bad for his father. Nebuch, living an impoverished life in a shtetl, he could move to the big city and make a living and get rid of all this nonsense and so on. He visited his home. He loved his parents. And he told his parents how he lives versus how they live, the kind of home he lives in, the kind of accommodations that he has. He said, what do you need this? What to live in this? The Malamed was not impressed with his son's successes. And he says, look, I wrote these 2 books of mathematics. He says, you'll never understand it anyway because you're a dumb Haimi. And you're too young to remember Haimi Town, huh? Okay. You remember Haimi Town?
Heard about it.
Jesse Jackson, when he was running for president, in 1984, referred to Brooklyn as Haimi Town. It was anyway, we're the Haimis. I don't mind being called a Haimi. I've been called worse things than a Haimi. But anyway, the father had one interest: to bring his son to Mount Rebbe. So he told his son, why don't you come see my Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe? And the son knew that the Alter Rebbe was a genius. And Alter Rebbe was also known as a great mathematician and physicist and astronomer. Alter Rebbe was not like them, wie man sagt. So he agreed. And his father arranged a yechidus, and he came to Mount Rebbe. And this boy walks into Alter Rebbe, and he tells Alter Rebbe, I'm not one of your chassidim, I'm one of the children of your chassidim, but I'm an enlightened man, I'm a true intellectual. And I came here to talk mathematics with you, and I've written 2 works of mathematics, 2 original. You know what it means to publish in mathematics? It's not like writing a book of Baba Mises, of stories and selling 1 million copies and making money. That you have to be smart. No one's interested. You don't make a lot of money, but this is called real creativity. He wrote 2 books of mathematics, which is an unbelievable achievement. Alter Rebbe took the books from him. Alter Rebbe asked for the books. He said, I don't know if you'll understand. Alter Rebbe says, it's fine. And Alter Rebbe sat there and turned the pages. The man is standing there or sitting. The room is quiet. I just visualize the scene. It's quiet. He's turning pages. Looks at each page like it's pictures. Boop, boop. Every once in a while he makes a fold. Every once in a while, every few pages, 50 pages, he makes a fold. He closes one book, takes the second book, he opens it up, turns the pages. Every once in a while he makes a fold. When he closes the second book, he picks them up. He hands them back to him. And he says, every place where I made a fold, there is an error. There's a mistake. This young man takes the books, and he's incredulous. He's shocked. Who does he think he is? This is a life, I worked my whole life on these books, and in 15 minutes, he's telling me there's mistakes. I thought at least the rabbi was intelligent. Now I know the rabbi also doesn't know anything. So he storms out of Yechidus. I have to get out of this Mishagoyim voice. That's all the Alter Rebbe told him. He didn't tell him, hello, how are you, how you doing, how's your wife, how's your children, garnished. When you go out of Yechidus, Mount Rebbe, there was something called a Yechidus Tanz, a Yechidus dance. And the Chassidim danced, and the people who danced were the ones who went into the Yechidus. Everybody else stood around. They dragged him into the Yechidus Tanz. I have to get out of this Mishagoyim voice. He ripped him, so they tried to schlep him to dance. You people are out of your minds. And they schlepped a few times. He had no choice. But the Alter Rebbe, there was gebrennt a fire, and he gets away from these Meshuggah Chassidim. He runs into the Zal, and he sits down to relax, to recover. He was so angry. He was so disappointed. And he sits there to relax. And then he thinks to himself, you know what? Let me check it out. What I got to lose? He opens up the first book, turns to the first fold, he unfolds it, and he looks, and there's a mistake. So now he's curious. He turns to the next fold. And remember, the Alter Rebbe saw this at a glance. This is his book. He looks, there's a mistake. He looks through both books, and in each page there is a mistake. Now he's blown away. But in the other say, he gets up and he runs. I always visualize 770 upstairs where Yechidus was, but I don't know how the Alter Rebbe's house looked. He runs from the Zal through the hallway where the magnet is and the elevator is, and he runs, and Leibel Groner is standing by the door in the Alter Rebbe's version, and says, where do you think you're going? He's like, I have to go in. He says, you were in 1 Yechidus a night. He says, no, you don't understand. First of all, I'm not a chassid. I'm not a Second of all, me and your Rebbe, we have a common language. We're smart people. We're not dumb guys. I need to see the Alter Rebbe now. I'm sorry. So there's an argument. An argument gets more animated. And this Yid Pashat starts to cry. I have to go into the Rebbe. And the Gabbai says, no. Eventually the door opens. And the Alter Rebbe says, what's the commotion? And the Gabbai says, Evil Arain, he wants to go in. 1 Yechidus, not 2. Alter Rebbe says, let him. He stayed by the Alter Rebbe for hours. And the bechiyas, the crying that was heard behind the door was unreal. And I saw 2 versions of the story. One version of the story was, the Alter Rebbe said that whenever he comes, they should let him in. So one version was that he came every day for 7 days. And he went to Alter Rebbe and he spent hours with Alter Rebbe. And he just disappeared, he vanished. Another version I saw, 7 weeks, every day of the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, he would come, he would go into the Alter Rebbe, and after this period, either of 7 days, 7 weeks, he disappeared. The Mittal Rebbe saw this kiruv, and he said to his father, who is this? So the Alter Rebbe said, this is the neshama of Rabbi Elazar ben Dodaya. This was his last Gilgul. He says, in every Gilgul, he was born to a Hamish, a Yiddish shtub, given every opportunity to be a tzaddik, and in every Gilgul, He messed it up. This is his last opportunity. Born to a Hasidic Yid in a Hasidic shtetl, the Alter Rebbe Chassid. He says, Alter Rebbe said, I had Mesiras Nefesh to bring him to me. I had Mesiras Nefesh that he should bother opening up the books and looking for the mistakes. I had Mesiras Nefesh, he should have a Seidus to want to come into me again. So that I was able to affect an aliyah in this is the Neshama of Elazar that died. This is a story of Alter Rebbe that Chassidim that tell. I want you to know that I have a friend whose parents lived years ago in Albany, New York. And he told me a very similar story, that he had his family was close. They were close to a family, 4 or 5, a husband and wife. All of them were professors, PhDs. One of their sons was a professor of mathematics. And he sent the Rebbe a newly published book of mathematics that he had written. And he got back the book with notes that the Rebbe scribbled. And the way my friend tells me the story is that one day his father or his grandfather hears a man screaming in the street like a madman. He looks outside, he sees his professor who never raises his voice. He's running from his house to their house. He's out of his mind. And he walks into the house. He says, how much time do you think the Rebbe spent on my book? He says, he's given me enough information here for 10 lectures, he said. Enough information. The Rebbe scribbled a few notes on his math book. Give me enough information for 10 lectures. Now I want to tell you my final story. There was a Yid who many of us knew, whose name was Harav Reuven Dunin. Rabbi Reuven Dunin. Rabbi Reuven Dunin passed away about a decade ago, about 10 years ago. Reuven Dunin was a real Baal Tshuva. That means to say, Shana Upidish. He grew up from in a very Hamish home, not a Hasidic home, but a Torah home. And during the years around the Hakamat HaMedina in the late 40s, after the war, when they were building the State of Israel, there were opportunities and there were tests. He dropped everything. When he became a chalutz, he became a pioneer, he started to make the desert bloom. And as frum as he had been before, he went, like only an Israeli can, only a Jew can. Don't pick on Israelis, so be careful. To the opposite extreme. And he became completely, not secular, intellectual. He became, and he lived this life for quite a few years. He drove his tractor, and he had his good time. It's a long story, which I don't have sufficient time to tell, but his family was obviously very disturbed. And they would talk to him, and they would try to reason with him. And one of his brothers gave him a page of Tanya. I don't know what page of Tanya. Intelligent he was. He read it, and he found it interesting. So he says to his brother, you have any more such pages? So he gave him a few more pages, and he read it, and it grabbed his interest. He says, where can I discuss this? With whom can I discuss this? He says, for this you have to go to Kfar Chabad. They were not Lubavitcher, but they sent him to the Shlomo Chaim in Kfar Chabad, and he became a Baal Tshuva. He abandoned his tractor, and he came to Kfar Chabad, and he became a Baal Tshuva. He was older than all the Bochrim. He was probably already in his mid-20s, and the boys were 18, 19, 20 years old. And he put his whole neshama. He would sleep very little. He would sit day and night and learn and daven. And he became a real Baal Tshuva. The tractor symbolized to him the serpent. Adam Marishan's snake was his tractor. To him, the essence of evil was the tractor, the truck. He spent about 6 months learning in Kfar Chabad, and he asked his mashpia, Rabbi Shlomo Chaim, about the possibility of going to the Rebbe. Rabbi Shlomo Chaim was an old-fashioned mashpia. He wasn't pushing people to go to the Rebbe until they were, as he felt it, ready. He used to say, Rebbe is like an electric current. You can plug in an air conditioner and it'll cool you off. You can plug in a heater and it'll warm you up. It all depends on what you plug in. It's a very wise insight. So he says, but you could go to the Rebbe. In those days, the mashpia actually mattered. Mashpia asked, if the mashpia said, no, you didn't go. So he gave him a shush to come to New York, came to 770. And he came to 770, and of course there were people here who picked him up, and he joined the yeshiva, and he had yechidus. 1957, this is 1957. And he wrote a note to the Rebbe, and it comes into the Rebbe. Now his mashpia had told him that the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth is a mandate for life. The first words that Rebbe is going to tell you is something, if the first word is this is your shlichus for your whole life. So pay careful attention to the first thing that Rebbe says. Try. Guess what happens? He walks into the Rebbe. He puts down the zettel. The Rebbe reads it. The Rebbe looks up at him, and the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth: "You know how to drive a tractor? Imagine. You know where to find the serpent." He was so blown away. He was so devastated. He was so hurt. He was so misunderstood. He just burst out crying. It's Tefananda gewend. And he stood there, he cried. The Rebbe stood there, sat there and looked at him. And finally, the Rebbe said to him, what'd you come here for? You came here to cry. What's the common head? What'd you come here for? Now, I feel that this question of the Rebbe is the essence of the story. Could you imagine a Yid is standing in front of the Rebbe and he's crying, and the Rebbe should ask you, why are you crying? I mean, it sounds insensitive. It was the Rebbe connecting to Achos. The Rebbe says, what'd you come here for? So he opened up. He tells the story. Reuven Dunin felt that he owes it to Lubavitch to share his story. He says, I had Yechidus. Young people today don't have Yechidus. He used to say, any person who had that kind of connection to the Rebbe owes the next generation this information. So he told his story. He would tell it a lot, because it's a very personal story. He said, I opened up and I told the Rebbe everything. I didn't keep one Aveda from the Rebbe. And he did a number, apparently. He ate Cholovakum, went to Pasakum, we had to make the Bracha Rishena. One day he missed Rabbi Natam's film. So, it was a joke. So when he finishes, he tells the Rebbe, I came to the Rebbe that the Rebbe should give me a derech of how to do tshuva. How can I do tshuva? So the Rebbe tells him as follows. And this is a lesson for life. Frier wird me sich einordnen in Teiru, Mitzvahs, Besimcha, Vatuv, Levov. Danach wird me reden wegen tshuva. First, you're going to establish yourself in Teiru, Mitzvahs, Besimcha, Vatuv, Levov, with joy and gladness of heart, and then we'll talk about tshuva. And the Rebbe gave him a whole derech and a whole seder. He stayed in 776 months. For those 6 months, the Rebbe was like a father to him. We were going to the Rebbe a few times a week. The Rebbe used to invite him in after Ma'ariv. He had a signal, and he would sneak in the back door. The Rebbe would leave his door open. And the Rebbe Pashat raised him, their kind. 6 months. The whole Reuven Dunan in 770 is 6 months. If you ever hear stories of Reuven Dunan and the Rebbe, then all those stories happened 6 months. Then after 6 months, the Rebbe told him to go home and get married and to drive a tractor. And he drove a tractor for 25 years in Haifa, which is the most secular city in Israel. People whom Freie Yidden who would not, how they looked at us frume. But when you see a rabbi with a beard on a tractor, the beard is a turn off, but the tractor is a turn on. He reached Yidden that nobody else could reach. Not with his beard and his personality, but with his tractor. So what the Rebbe Taka told him was Taka true. This is Reuven Dunan. And he never finished the Yechidus. The Rebbe never followed up. The Rebbe told him, first we'll do Yiddishkeit, Simcha, Levav, and then we'll think about Tshuva. 25 years later, in the 1980s, 25 Jahre später, this happened around 1957, 67, 77, 82, Tov Shem Mem Beis Mem Gimel. He was here, I think, of Vav Tishrei, and the Rebbe spoke a whole sikh about Tshuva. And he felt that the Rebbe was talking to him directly. The Rebbe was telling him the end of a Yechidus from 25 years before. So after the Sikha, he went over to the Rebbe and he told the Rebbe L'chaim. I don't know what else he told the Rebbe, but the Rebbe finished. The Rebbe told him how to do tshuva. Now, the thing you need to know about tshuva, the gift of tshuva, is the idea that we had a second chance. No? Yeah. For a person, see, this is a beautiful bottle of orange juice. Isn't it beautiful? It's full, yeah? Imagine someone takes a pebble or a chveisvas, a BB gun, and shatters it, and there's orange juice all over the table and all over the floor. Move away, you're going to get wet. Yeah, it's broken, finished, it's all over the place. Yeah, then what? What do you do? What are you going to do? You're going to clean it up, throw it out, and get another bottle of orange juice. The broken bottle of orange juice is broken, it's finished, it's wasted. What's tshuva? That you can take the bottle of orange juice that's broken, you can fix it, you can put the orange juice that was in that bottle back in and use it again. That's tshuva. Tshuva doesn't mean that the Eibusher says, I forgive you. Tshuva means that the Aveda is repaired. Not forgiven, repaired, healed. Tshuva doesn't mean forgiveness. Tshuva means return. Like the people of Nineveh, to put back the orange juice into the broken bottle. It's a matana that Eibusher gave Yidden. that we could fix the wrong we've done, and we could fix it in a retroactive way. We could fix it lamafreya. We could fix it backwards. And Chassidus teaches us that tshuva you got to do b'tech simcha. Tshuva you have to do with joy, even though tshuva is, shall we say, not the favorite part of our lives, because it reminds us not the favorite part of our life. The joy of tshuva is the gratitude we feel to the Eibush that we can have this connection. And Chassidus, of course, teaches us that you don't need to have Avedas in order to do tshuva. Because tshuva doesn't only mean I sinned and I'm returning. Wherever I am, I could be closer to the Eibush. That's tshuva. As close as one is, tshuva means come even closer. And just to conclude, Al Derech HaRemez, Rebbe Spilman, your name is Esther Rochel. Your last name is Spilman. If you ever thought about it, I didn't think about it till this afternoon. Esther Rochel and Spilman, it's nicht das a good shidduch. I mean, it's a wonderful shidduch, don't misunderstand. But you have to think about it. Why? Because Spilman, I don't think Spilman needs much explaining. Spilman sounds like a party. Nicht das a Spilman doesn't mean learning Gemara or doing tshuva or sitting on the floor. Spilman means to play around. The word means. Spiel means to play. Spielman means the person who spends his life playing around. The Chazal say the Eibishter spends the last 3 hours a day playing. Mesachek im Yossi. And Yitzchak, Sarah Imenu says, Tzchaik asali elikim. The Eibishter made me laugh. Right? And Rashi says, Harbe tzchaik, there was a lot of laughter in the world, a lot of joy in the world. Esther and Rochel. Esther means concealment. Right? And it has to do with Golas, and with Tzaddis, and with Tshuva, as you mentioned. And Rachel also, the Chassidus says, if I had 15 more minutes, I would give you a prepared version, but I don't have time. That the Rachel is a shepsele, is a sheep. And the Taka Hermid is Rachmanis. That's why in Chassidus, Rachel is thinking to Rachmanis because her bleat, her moo, as they say in Olateda, is very, very, it evokes compassion. And when you share the wool of a sheep, Kerochel, like a sheep, lefnei gate azeh, for those who share it in Alam, it goes quiet. And it's explained in Chassidus because it doesn't want the wool. So it's in Chassidus that the hair represents the small amounts of chayas that go from Kedusha to L'umazeh, go in times of Golas. Esther is a name that has a connection to Golas. Rachel's name is the Golas. Spilman sounds like Geula. So Chassidus says that Rachel, sorry, Meinu said, Tzchaik asali elikim. When Yitzchak Avinu was born, what did she say? Tzchaik, laughter, asali, Spilman. The Eibush gave me elikim. Why doesn't she say Tzchaik asali Hashem? Yudke Vavke is the name of Rachamim. Elikim is the name of Dinim. Right? So Chassidus explains that from the Dinim comes the greatest Simcha. From the Dinim, from the Tzaddis, from the challenges, from the Avelis, comes the greatest Simcha. The greatest Simcha that could possibly be. And in Chassidus, it means you're doing tshuva, and the tshuva Tech Simcha Otoli Lov. And I actually wrote down a few points about this. Right? First of all, Tzchaik Asali Elikim is the very fact that we live in the material world. This world is not exactly a holy place. Right? So, Tzchaik Asali Elikim, a neshama comes into this world and serves the Eibishter and gives the Eibishter Nachas Ruach. That's the greatest simcha that could be, and the person has to feel that simcha. And then, of course, Nebuch, we go through an Avelis, a close Avelis, an Avelis that hurts. So Tzchaik Asali Elikim, from the pain comes Mitzvah and Eibishter Sof Grasa the Simcha. And then, of course, a Yid who serves the Eibishter Tanemis, the Nerenskite. The Pasuk says, Yosef da'as, Yosef machav. You know, deeper people are realer people. But every experience in their life is realer. Right? They don't, when they're happy, they're not all over the place. Because there's a certain depth to them. And when they experience Atzar and Avelis, they experience it deeper than other people. But Yosef da'as, Yosef machav, without Chassidus, it ends with machav. And with Chassidus, it ends with Shpilman. Let's sing Chatzil Levot. Nasach Nachas. And a happy birthday. Yes, God bless all of you. Shev Nachas from your children, so that Yeshvig will have Nachas from her grandchildren. But sooner or later, Rebbe, you should allow yourself to have Nachas from all the wonderful things you do. Okay, good. Esther Rochel Spilman.